There's a thing that Red Dwarf does, and I don't even think it realises that it does it, but it's been bothering me for years. Because the longer you sit with it, not the jokes, not the performances, not the nostalgia, but the situation. Still eating, still arguing, still watching the same old films, still doing the same old shit. And I can't get away from the question that comes out of that. How do you live with yourself in a universe like that? Not heroically, not bravely, just day to day. Just to be clear up front though, this isn't a definitive reading. I'm not saying this is what the writers meant. I'm not trying to correct anybody's nostalgia, and I'm not telling you how you're supposed to feel about the show. This is just me circling something I can't quite leave alone. And if you see it differently, that's fine, because honestly, I'm more interested in the question than the answer. So just to set some ground rules here, a lot of this is built on what I've already said about Red Dwarf. I made a video ages ago and I declared that Red Dwarf was the #1 rogue spaceship of all time. And in said video I said a lot of stuff about Red Dwarf which a lot of people weren't happy about, despite the fact that I'm actually really a huge fan of the show. But I think it was when I declared that Red Dwarf was the biggest, most nihilistic horror show ever committed to film that sort of threw a lot of people. I basically argued in no particular order that this isn't a difficult universe, it's a hostile one. Humanity isn't struggling, it's finished. There's no rebuilding phase, there's no aftermath arc, no sense that anything is being carried forward. The catastrophe isn't coming, it's already happened off screen, and the show never lets you forget that. Time doesn't behave, reality doesn't behave, cause and effect barely behave. Big moments don't accumulate, sacrifices don't stick, growth resets. Even death ain't stable. Which means there's no moral ladder here, no sense that effort leads anywhere. You don't earn meaning in this universe. You don't build towards it. You don't even lose it dramatically. It's just absent. And that's why I called it a nihilistic horror show. Not because it's loud, not because it's cruel for shock value, but because it traps people in a universe where nothing adds up. And then asks them to just carry on anyway. And yeah, somewhere out there, maybe humanity carried on, maybe it didn't. But for Lister, everyone he ever knew is dead. Every human context is gone. That's not tragedy, that's indifference. Even the very act of being put into stasis serves to reinforce this. Todd Hunter even says to Lister, you'll become a non-event mass with a quantum probability of 0. And when Lister emerges, he may as well be a non-event mass with a quantum probability of 0. This universe doesn't rage, it doesn't punish hubris, it just kills everyone in the end. For instance, the end of humanity doesn't come through war or hubris or some great moral failing. The whole crew of Red Dwarf is wiped out in a radiation leak. Not because of a war, not because of a great moral failing, but because somebody, who shall remain nameless, did a dodgy repair job. A drive plate, a leak, Cadium-2. That's not a tragedy, that's indifference with a clipboard. Everybody dies and everybody lives by accident. No meaning, no judgment, just gone. Anything that you could possibly cling to for any kind of meaning is removed systematically by the writers. Look at family. Lister is an orphan. Even if he wasn't, he'd be 3 million years from his family. And he even has a family. He goes and becomes a father. But, you know, he can't even derive meaning from that because he has children, but they're taken away from him. They have to go and live with their mother in another dimension. And then when he gets one back, seemingly, in future echoes, It gets killed in front of him. Even fatherhood is temporary here. Love is offered, but it's completely hollowed out, right? Kachansky exists, but it's never his Kachansky. It's never Lister's Kachansky. She comes from another dimension. When he finally gets to be with her, she's literally from another universe. She's got a different background, a different class. She's a different person. The future that is promised to Lister, in that episode, Future Echoes, right? Lister is promised a future and it gives them a sort of mission to carry out throughout the course of the show. Well, when he gets it, it belongs to somebody else, doesn't it? Another example of how this show is an existential nightmare, wrapped up as a comedy, is the relationships. Look at Lister, supposedly the last human being alive, but he's not surrounded by humans in different forms. The cat isn't a companion, he's a cat. If Lister died, particularly in the early seasons, the cat probably would have ate him. That's not friendship, that's proximity. Rimmer is brought back, not because he's loved or respected or needed, but because conflict is better than silence. He isn't alive, he isn't even properly dead. He's a recording that knows he's a recording. Whatever relationship is happening there is happening inside a system that can turn him off at any moment. Crichton feels like a friend. He's the closest thing Lister has to a friend. But even that collapses if you look too closely. Crichton's programmed to care. His warmth is conditional. His loyalty is written into his code. Even when he breaks his programming, it's because somebody else has told him to do it. So what about religion then? A lot of people cling to religion to derive meaning from. Well, religion, forget about it, right? Because that's mocked immediately in this show. Lister hilariously transpires to be a god if he's a god of the cat people. And it doesn't give his life any meaning, it just makes him responsible for mass violence. Even transcendence is poisoned. And even the act of surviving in what I'm describing as a pretty hostile universe doesn't give him any meaning. Lister doesn't get any dignity in struggling to survive. The ship provides everything for them. It's got 30,000 years worth of food on it, infinite water, recycled air. There's no test, there's no frontier, no Robinson Crusoe meaning to it, just routine inside a machine that outlived its purpose for 3 million years. So, if all that's true, if this really is the universe they're stuck in, then the interesting question isn't why it's bleak. That part's obvious. The question is, how do they function inside of it? Because they don't collapse, they don't go mad, they don't lie down and wait to disappear. They cook, they argue, they watch films, they get obsessed with stupid things. They build routines inside a universe that has no interest in them at all. And that's the bit I keep coming back to. Not the nihilism itself, but what grows in the space it leaves behind. Because when meaning goes, something always moves in to replace it. Not hope, not faith, not purpose. Something smaller, more practical. Something that just helps you get through the day. The first thing that fills that gap is food. And I don't mean that metaphorically. In Red Dwarf, food becomes a fixed point in a universe where nothing holds still. Meals ain't just meals in Red Dwarf. They're full on events. Curry night, vindaloo, beer, snacks eaten at the same time, in the same place, in the same way. It's routine, yeah, but it's more than that. Because when nothing in your life is leading anywhere, the act of eating something familiar becomes grounding. Not nourishing in a heroic sense, not symbolic, just stabilising. Food gives shape to the day. It creates a before and an after. It's something you can anticipate in a universe that doesn't offer anticipation. And it matters that it's cheap food. It matters that it's not fine dining and it's not aspirational, because curry and takeaway food and comfort food, they're things chosen for intensity, not refinement, because when your future's completely collapsed, you don't eat to become a better person. You eat to feel something reliable, to mark time, to say, this day happened. And once you notice that, you start to see it everywhere. Food isn't a background detail in Red Dwarf. It's a coping mechanism, a way of imposing rhythm on a life that otherwise has no reason to keep going. It's not joy, it's just maintenance. Once food anchors the day, routine fills in the rest. And again, not in a heroic way, not discipline, not self-improvement, just repetition. In this universe, routine isn't about progress, it's about shape. You get up, you go to the same rooms, you sit in the same seats, you do the same things in roughly the same order. Not because it leads anywhere, but because it stops time becoming a blur. Routine creates edges, it divides the day into manageable pieces. Without it, everything would just smear together into one endless present. And the show is very precise about this. They don't drift aimlessly, they don't wander the ship like lost souls. They have places, they have habits, they have setups. The sleeping quarters, the drive room, the table, the bunks. Spaces that mean nothing in themselves but become meaningful through use. And that's important, because in a universe where nothing accumulates, routine becomes a way of pretending that yesterday existed and tomorrow might well still. Not in a hopeful sense, just a practical one. Routine doesn't fix the problem, it manages it. It keeps the mind occupied, it keeps despair from flooding in all at once. You don't ask what the point of any of this is, because it's nearly time to do the next thing. And that's how you survive in a place like this. Not by believing harder, but by breaking the day into small enough pieces that you can live inside them. Again, not joy, not meaning, just maintenance. And before you all pile into the comment section to remind me that they're always having adventures on Red Dwarf, what you've got to remember is this: we're only dropping in occasionally. We're seeing the highlights, the odd incidents, the strange weeks. What we don't see is the vast amount of time in between, the days where nothing happens, where routine just runs. And that's the inference that the show's making, that the adventure is the interruption, not the norm. So, after food and after routine, the next thing that fills the gap is escapism. And again, not as fantasy, not as aspiration. No. This is an anaesthetic for them. In Red Dwarf, films matter far more than they should. Games matter more, stories matter more, imaginary worlds matter more. Not because they offer insight, but because they offer elsewhere. When your actual life is this fucked and has no forward motion, being somewhere else, even briefly, becomes medicinal. They're not watching things to be inspired, they're watching things they already know. Old films, old stories, familiar beats, things where the ending's fixed. Well, this is because unpredictability is exhausting in a world where everything else is unstable. So escapism here for them isn't about discovery, it's about control. You know how long it lasts, you know what happens, you know when it's over. That matters. Well, it matters even more when your real life is as fucked as theirs is. Games do the same job as well. You've got rules, objectives, win conditions, artificial meaning, but meaning you can complete. You can finish a game, even when you can't finish your life. And that's not a joke, it's a coping strategy. Escapism in Red Dwarf isn't about avoiding reality, it's about rationing it. Taking it in small enough doses that it doesn't overwhelm you. Not joy, not fulfillment, just relief. And then there's the humour, which is the first thing everybody points to and normally the last. But the humour in Red Dwarf isn't there to make them happy, it's there to stop something worse from happening. The jokes don't resolve anything, they don't improve the situation, they don't move the story forward, they just release pressure. Think about it. Look at Red Dwarf and see how many times the humour arrives right after something really bleak has happened, or pointless, or humiliating. Not as a punchline, as a release, a way of stopping that moment from sitting too long. Because if it did sit, if the characters actually stayed with what had just happened, the tone wouldn't be comic anymore. It would be unbearable. So the joke comes in, not to deny the situation, but to keep it survivable. And that's why the humour is often very petty, or mean, or self-defeating, or just aggressively stupid. It's not wit as elevation, it's wit as insulation, a way of breaking the emotional circuit before it overloads. They mock each other, they undercut moments, they sabotage sincerity, because sincerity in this universe is fucking dangerous. If you take things too seriously, you start asking questions that don't have answers. So humour steps in, that shuts that down. Not joy, not optimism, just damage control. So once food, routine and escapism and humour are doing the work of keeping you upright, identity fills the gap. And in Red Dwarf, identity is never something discovered, it's something performed. Because in a universe where meaning doesn't accumulate, being someone becomes more important than being right. Take the cat. His vanity isn't confidence, it's structure, fashion, pose, status, hierarchy, all surface, all presentation, but it gives him a role. If nothing matters, at least this matters. At least there's ranking, at least there's taste, at least there's a mirror. Rimmer's doing the same thing as well, just in a different register. Uniforms, rules, ranks, exams. He clings to authority that no longer exists, not because it's useful, but because it gives him a shape to live inside. And without that shape, he'd have to confront the possibility that his suffering was never leading anywhere. And that's unbearable. So identity becomes armour, not truth, not growth, performance. And the thing is, the show never punishes them for this, because it's not pretending they're doing it out of vanity, they're doing it to stay intact. When meaning collapses, identity steps in as a replacement system, a way of saying, this is who I am, even if it doesn't lead anywhere. Again, not joy, not purpose, just containment. And most of the time that works. You've got food, routine, escapism and humour. Even your identity helps you through. Until the show does something rare. It stops and asks what happens when coping stops becoming a habit and starts becoming a belief. That is where Red Dwarf gets deeply uncomfortable, because there's an episode where the show briefly stops letting the characters cope quietly. It's out of time, and what it does is simple and deeply cruel. It shows them a future where all of these coping strategies have worked. They've survived, they're still alive, they're comfortable, they eat well, they dress well, they travel through history, sampling all the best bits. On the surface, it looks like success, and then the rot starts to show, because the future versions of the crew aren't happier, they're flatter. They've taken everything that once helped them to survive and turned it into a worldview. Pleasure isn't a relief anymore, it's a principle. Routine isn't containment, it's just stagnation. Identity isn't armour, it's just entitlement. When Crichton says we're Epicureans now, it isn't wisdom and it isn't a joke, because coming from Crichton, the character built around service, rules and moral frameworks, it lands differently. This isn't rebellion, it isn't hedonism as an escape, it's rationalisation. It's the language of ethics being repurposed to excuse comfort, to turn survival habits into a philosophy. And that's the point. If even Crichton can reach a place where pleasure becomes principle, where consequence is shrugged off with a neat label, then something's gone badly wrong. And that's when the present crew recoil, because they're not seeing freedom, they're seeing what happens when coping stops being provisional. So I don't think Red Dwarf is asking us to admire any of this, and I don't think it's condemning it either. It isn't saying this is how you should live or this is what you become. It's just showing what happens when meaning collapses, what grows in the gap. Food, routine, escapism, humour, identity, things that work until they don't. And when the show finally holds up a mirror, when it finally shows us a future where coping has hardened into belief, it doesn't replace it with something better. It doesn't offer faith or progress or redemption. It just quietly pulls back and lets the present crew reject it. Not because they've found meaning, but because they recognise the danger of pretending that they have. And that's what I keep coming back to. Red Dwarf isn't a story about finding purpose in a meaningless universe. It's about learning how to live without lying to yourself about it. About surviving without pretending survival's the same thing as living. About knowing the difference between what keeps you going and what makes life meaningful, and refusing to confuse the two of them. So when I called it a nihilistic horror show, I didn't mean that as an insult. I meant it as a description of a universe that never blinks, that never reassures you, that just watches people carry on with whatever old shit they've got to hand. And maybe that's why the show's lasted, because it doesn't promise that things will make sense. It just shows you what people do when they don't. So, if you got something out of this, stick around, hit the subscribe button. If you didn't, that's also fine. I'm not trying to settle Red Dwarf once and for all. I'm just interested in the questions that it keeps leaving behind. And if you've got a different reading on this, or you think I've missed something fucking obvious, then the comment section's there for you. Just be gentle with me, because I really do bruise quite easily. Also, if this kind of slow, uncomfortable unpacking is your sort of thing, then there's a lot more of it on the channel. No answers though, just some better questions. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.
Sounds like the end of the world. Flames dancing wild, unfurled.